Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball!
Well, hello, folks, and once again, welcome back to the Don Sullivan Show, the show where we talk about everything science, technology, and computing related. Today, we're going to have a very special episode of the Don Sullivan Show, and that's because we're going to talk about something that's more on the periphery of the science, technology, and computing. But we talk about everything that's related to science, technology, and computing. And in particular, we want to discuss who works in science, particularly technology, and more specifically Silicon Valley and computing. And the reason we're going to talk about that is we all know that there is a strange skewing of demographics. And I'm really glad to say that the Don Sullivan Show itself has a very wide demographic base, male, female, and every other demographic in between that anybody wants to consider to be a demographic. So we're going to talk about why there aren't more women in positions all throughout the entire vertical space of all technology companies in Silicon Valley. There is some areas where that's not true, but most areas that is true. And to have that discussion, Steve and I, and Steve will say hello in a minute, I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine, someone who I worked with for quite a while at VMware, Shinie Shaw. So Shinie, say hello, and we're going to talk about this subject.
Hello. Thanks for having me on the show.
So Shinie's been up and down the food chain in a number of different companies. She's seen a lot of different things throughout the years in Silicon Valley, and I can't think of a better person to have this discussion with, this open discussion with. So Steve, say hello and do your thing.
Sure, no problem. Greetings from the Garden State. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. Learn more at licensefortress.com. And please support our producer by visiting axtinc.com. That's AXTINK.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation and settle all those lawsuits after that dinosaur park he tried opening near Costa Rica failed inspection. Back to you, Don.
Well, speaking of lawsuits, you remind me, Steve, I need to read out this awful disclaimer that all our lawyers, which is a big show here, a big company, so we have lawyers that make us state this disclaimer. So all statements by the hosts and the guests of the Don Sullivan Show are the personal opinions of the hosts and the guests, who all agree that the following content is the property of Zanalytics LLC to be publicly and exclusively used on the Don Sullivan Show. And even though the audience can't see it, everybody's shaking their heads. So once again, we can continue without any particular restraints that we have, because this is going to be a very open and, again, sometimes sensitive discussion. Because when we talk about demographics and we talk about men and women in certain areas, the knee-jerk reaction is so often, if there is an attempt to alter those demographics or do anything to recognize that there is a demographic skewing, that often becomes a something that winds up becoming a negative to anybody who is recruited to try to fix that particular demographic skewing, or it's just simply not recognized that the best way and the most effective way to recruit is to look in the areas that you, for whatever reason, have not been successful. I mean, this is true with sales. This is true with politics when you're looking for votes. If you go into the areas where you're not, the areas of personnel that you're not successful, and you ask yourself why you're not successful, and you focus on those people, and you find out why they're not actually coming around to your way of thinking or working for you, then you can be even more successful. And I really want to get that out in the open. I want to talk about it. And I hope that companies are able to learn a little bit from this. So again, today we're going to openly discuss this subject. And as we do, to a fault maybe, some would say here on the Don Sullivan Show, sometimes we go a little bit overboard maybe, and Steve might comment on that later. A subject this is a subject that's difficult in every respect. This personal demographics, as I said, in Silicon Valley, but any true American doesn't care about immutable demographics at all, whether it's hair color, gender, height, or whatever else. None of these things should play a part, and they don't when you're in a healthy situation in any company or in your friend base or whatever you want to call it. But however, from a perspective of just raw free enterprise, that is placing the most capable person in the right position with the right authority, we simply don't see this taking place in Silicon Valley. And I am by nature a head coach. I'm a coach. My belief is, and I follow sort of the Bill Belichick ways of thinking. My belief has always been to find people and put them in positions that they can be successful. And then you figure out your game plan from there on. So I really want to discuss why it is that, and I'll give you an anecdote for this, why it is that we still, to this day, even after some of the explicit, overt, sometimes silly attempts at putting people in positions maybe where they didn't belong, just to say you had a woman in a particular position, rather than actually doing something to determine why it is that you don't have a reasonable percentage of women in positions in tech development, say, and in the executive positions and so on. I spent a weekend in Las Vegas at the beginning of December at a very major conference, and we were in a very renowned Italian restaurant, Carmine's, in the Forum Shops, and you can see for a long way in one big dining room. And a number of us looked up, and I looked around. I say, "What's missing here?" Well, I could see tables right within my view of 10, 12, 15, 5 people, and I swear there was not a single table that had more than one woman sitting at it. And I cannot understand in this day and age why that's happening. But the number of men to women in that restaurant, and they were all clearly groups that had come from teams of different companies that were attending what was the reInvent conference in Las Vegas. And I looked at it and shook my head, and it's just amazing. So I asked Shinie to come on here and talk about it. So Shinie, after I've just ranted on here for the first 3 or 4 minutes, would you give us a little bit of your background and tell us who you are and what you've done, and then maybe try to answer my question.
Yeah, no, thank you. I have a lot of opinions for those who know me. So my background, I have a background in industrial engineering. I spent the earlier part of my career in aerospace and manufacturing. And then when I moved to the Bay Area, I joined tech, through Cisco. Then I went to VMware, and now I am VP of production operations at Flexera. So that's kind of been my journey. And what you just described on does not surprise me. In fact, it was very common for me when I would go to conferences. One of the things is, I was thinking about that as you were talking, is what you saw at the restaurants kind of a lagging indicator. Women are being weeded out kind of through the year. So, this happens much earlier. So it's like kind of who
weeded out.
Encourages...
I mean to interrupt you. Weeded out. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, maybe it was a little harsh, but the idea was there. So it's like, in high school, like who's encouraged to study math and science? Once, you go into college, who are the students that are getting mentored and getting the professor's time? And then once you move into a technical role, who's getting subtly encouraged to move out? So an example that, I was thinking about when you were saying that was a colleague of mine. And so she was a rock star engineer. She was super organized, technically strong, and the customers loved her. And so the solution, the SE leader kind of tapped her shoulder. It's like, hey, you're really great at this. Please come help run operations for me. And she was really flattered to be recognized. And then several years later, in Las Vegas at one of these tech conferences, she and I were actually having dinner. And we were actually talking about her career. And she confided in me that, she loved her job in operations, but she really hit a ceiling. And, she thought about going back to becoming a solution engineer or leading a team of SEs. But one of the things that, she was really struggling with is she's been out of the game for several years. And she often wondered what it would have been like had she not taken this role. And that was just kind of one example, but you see this pattern consistently. Women in technology are often encouraged to move. So for example, product managers are often encouraged to move to product marketing. Engineers are often encouraged to move into roles like UX. So it's just
okay. Can I stop you just for a second, though?
Yeah,
that's
please.
Exactly what happened with me, though, isn't it? I mean, I was at one point say in 2004 or 5, I was a very high-end technical Oracle person at Oracle, and then I went to a startup, and I was still very, very technical, and then I became an SE, or I was recruited to go to VMware. And then I was asked to run business critical applications. So that's just, and I certainly thought of that as it's something I wanted to do, and it was a promotion in every way, and I was very good at it. I like it, but it's sort of the same thing you just said, isn't it?
You had technical in your title, if I remember correctly. Technical product marketing manager?
It was everything. It was broad. So
kind of started with expert. Yeah. It was kind of a strange title, to be honest.
They made it up for me, so it's
you had a special title for sure.
Go ahead. So I'm sorry I interrupted you with
no.
That's interesting. You think it starts that early, like even like in primary school, girls aren't being encouraged into the science and towards STEM enough.
Yes, even now, my daughter, my son, and just kind of looking, we've kind of raised them very neutrally as best as we can. Always encouraged her to go into, science and engineering, but it's about for girls and women. It's like, how are you in your communication? Whereas like for boys and for men, it doesn't really matter. Often you'll hear boys will be boys, right? And so it's like those type of phrasing and terminology really digs into kind of how society perceives one sex or another. If you want to be kind of really like, I don't know what the right word is, but if you really want to talk about this, there is a likability. Women's significantly lower than men's. We just pause you there and kind of think about that particular statement.
It's interesting because if a woman is very assertive or aggressive, often she gets called the B word. Whereas if a man is doing some of those things, that's not, he could be, he's just an alpha. So I would agree with Shinie that there's, from what I've seen at least, there can be a pretty significant double standard. Like women that are kind of bosses or bossy are viewed a lot different than men that are bossy oftentimes.
That is absolutely correct.
Do you think that's not getting better? And I'll put it this way. I thought it was. I thought that VMware at times, and again, not to be disparaging, because the effort was certainly genuine before 2020, was really making an effort to not just recruit, but to put people sometimes in positions they didn't belong. And maybe that wasn't prevalent throughout the entire valley. It was more virtual signaling or just lip service. But I would have perceived it as being as having been at least attempted. And again, that particular event that I just described just really shocked me at the massive distinction.
Yeah, there do seem to be a lot of females in marketing roles, based on my experience. But yeah, when it comes to the people on the more technical side, just from my own personal experience working with them, oftentimes they're males. So I do think she's onto something there. I know that Shinie, that Silicon Valley has been described before as a boys' club. Do you think it kind of still is? Has it improved in any meaningful way over the years?
I think it's definitely still a boys' club. I think it varies kind of by company and by department and by honestly like the hiring manager. The bias is definitely still there. So I did some digging a little bit to kind of prep for this call because I didn't want to just like make shit up and Shinie's perception. So it's founded based on study. So going back to what I just said, the Harvard business case, they actually put a case study together where they said they created a fictional, successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist. And everything was identical in these two case studies, except one venture capitalist was named Heidi and one was named Howard. And the likability, the competence that was evaluated by the students was like, but the likability, Howard was viewed as assertive, strategic, and a leader. Heidi was viewed as aggressive, selfish, and not a person that they'd want to work for. And so one of the things is like, this is still prevalent
And let me ask,
in
just
our
sort of
language.
a blind, Shinie, just let me, for the audience, this was a blind study, right? So
correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah,
this was a blind study. The case studies were handed to a group of MBA students at Harvard, and then they were asked to kind of on this. So you didn't know which case study that you got. And so it was shocking that on the likability, on the competence scale, they were rated equally. The likability scale, it was stark different. And one of the things I just kind of want to also point out, just in the English language, it's like, the words you say, it's like, oh, she's a working mom. Oh, she's a chatty Cathy, Debbie Downer, negative Nancy, right? And so it's like these words, like they matter. Language matters. And it's like how we society these languages, and it just seeps in that whole unconscious bias. It kind of creates the noise in the system. And as a result, going back, it's just through every step of a woman's career, they are being judged, especially particularly in the technical field, whether they are competent or not, through the biases and the patterns that have historically been.
How do you think you've avoided this? Because quite honestly, you're extremely nice and you're an extremely effective leader when it comes to projects, whether or not you are in charge of a project or you are, somebody who's working on a project. Obviously, leadership comes from a lot of different angles. And at the same time, you're very ambitious. You've always wanted to move around and you've been successful everywhere you've gone. How have you navigated this?
It's a fine balance. I've had myself to kind of catch the words that I use when I describe myself. One of the things, though, is I'm constantly having to justify myself in ways that, others may not. I'm constantly having to justify that I am technical enough, that I'm strategic enough,
that I hear all the time.
Financial acumen. Yes.
I hear that all the time, and that is incredibly unfair, and it's usually just wrong. But and again, I'm so sorry we're interrupting you here, but these are points that I really want to bring up. I hear that all the time from some of the most technically adept and knowledgeable people that happen to be women that I know.
Yeah, no, and that's why I bring it up, right? So it's like it's a balance in knowing that I have a very narrow likability window, knowing that people are judging my competence not because of the outcomes, but because of my gender and how I look. And so this is kind of a tightrope that myself and every woman, needs to balance. In fact, once I became kind of aware of this, I remember product marketing. I had a peer, I just wasn't technical enough. And I pointed out that I was the one with an engineering degree that he did not. And, years later, I was running a sales team and I was, chit-chatting with my SE counterpart. And he was like, wow, he's like, Shinie, I don't even actually have a college degree. And I am now a sales leader. And not once in my career have I ever been questioned about my technical credibility. And so just kind of that contrast really, struck me. And so after kind of that moment, when I hear someone kind of questioning a female leader for their technical acumen, I always push back, on their behalf, because I was like, this other leader is not as technical. I've never heard you question that individual. So knowing that bias and knowing the fact that I have to justify myself, I do try my best, when I hear other people question other leaders, to help and back them up.
It is interesting. You mentioned sort of the hybrid role that I had for a decade. And I had both feet. That's why I had neither title in product marketing and in technical marketing. And it is incredibly stark, the difference in the gender demographics between technical marketing and product marketing. And obviously, this doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense from a perspective of companies that are ostensibly doing everything they can do to be as profitable as they can. They're clearly leaving talent on the table, so to speak. And but I'm not sure that it is simply just hiring managers or even personnel that are in higher positions that don't get this or don't recognize it. I think it's become something that's so ingrained in the system. It's almost, and I don't know what other words to use, but natural.
Yeah, I really like how you use the word the system, because I do think that is, you're spot on. Hiring is about risk management. It's not about hiring the best. It's not done intentionally. And so, what's the best way to kind of predict the future is to look at patterns of the past.
Okay, so
and by looking,
can I stop you again there, because that's a fascinating thing you just said that I never really dawned on me. Hiring is about risk management rather than hiring the most capable. That would seem to me to be counterintuitive to at least an early company who is as aggressively as possible trying to push themselves forward into becoming a real player. I mean, I would want to take risks.
So think about, let's use VMware as an example. Think about any time someone has said, oh man, that person's made a lot of really good hires, versus, oh man, that person's made a lot of really bad hires. So if you think about it, is the system favors just, you want to be with, and in order to have really rock star hires, sometimes you're going to take a swing and you're going to miss, and you're going to have dud hires. But the system really penalizes you for having dud hires.
So nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, right?
Yeah. Correct. Yep.
Go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. It sounds like you're judged more often on your misses versus, maybe not everyone you hire is a rock star, but if they're not total duds, you're not going to be in the hot seat.
Yep.
So
go ahead. Using that approach. Well, approach, HR and hiring managers, they rely on proxies, right? They rely on referrals. They like to recruit from titles of companies that they're familiar with. And then they look at your title, right? So if you are trying to hire someone who has a unique title for this particular role, you have to spend more time justifying. It's all about that whole pattern recognition that people like to check the box, because
I imagine with AI hiring and filtering, at least, it's become much worse in that regard.
Well,
yes,
AI was made by men too, or if it's trained on existing data, wouldn't it be trained on current biases?
On existing patterns, yeah. But I mean, that is the point. That is the point, that the pattern and the behavior of the past is being ingrained programmatically in the machine learning results, which makes it worse.
Yep, absolutely. And so when you said the system, I was like, you were spot on.
Well, let me tell you another study that I read about a year ago, which actually shocked me. Stephen, I actually thought for a second this came from you guys, but it didn't. I looked it back up again, and I reread the thing before we had this call, and it's an amazing factor, and this is very much goes hand in hand with the point in regards to the system. It apparently is the case that female HR hiring managers, not necessarily the hiring manager, but the female counterpart of the hiring manager, are no more likely to hire qualified women than their male counterparts in HR. In fact, the male counterparts are slightly more likely to hire women than the female than the female executives who are making the hiring decision in HR. I mean, that's how ingrained in the system it apparently is.
Yes. I think I came across the same study as well. And I remember reading it and I was like, yeah, the system, like we're operating it, like they have the same checklist that everyone else is working off of. So that's why it's called unconscious bias.
Like, what can we, is there anything we can glean from that? Like, I don't know.
Or do about it.
Yeah, we're do about it. Yeah.
So I've been thinking about this for quite a while, because at VMware, they really did try to hire more women. In fact, there was a while where, every candidate had to be interviewed by a woman. And, the answer is, I don't know. This is very complicated. Obviously, if it was simple, we would have figured this out by now. But one of the things that I just want to share, one of my favorite examples where an industry did at least start overcoming is the music industry. So Boston Symphony in the 70s or 80s, they started to do blind auditions. So a blind audition is when the musician performs behind a curtain or a screen. So the judge on the other side can only evaluate based on sound and not based on appearance, gender, or age. And it was also to the point where they would have the women like take their heels off. So you couldn't tell that, it was a woman based on, their shoes. So one of the biases is, men play louder. So therefore they're better suited to play brass.
And you know what? That didn't apply to Prince, by the way. He wore heels all the time and he did just fine, but go ahead.
You wouldn't have gotten picked then.
Yeah. But, the results were astounding. By doing blind auditions, the probability of women being hired increased 25 to 50%. So what we need to do is we need to figure out how to take the irrelevant signals out, right? Like what gender you are has nothing to do with your ability, to play a brass instrument, as an example.
Well, I'm guessing that they were very happy with the results. And they probably, they should have at least implemented some aspect of that approach to filter out for whatever phenomena was happening. I don't like the unconscious bias concept to begin with. I want to believe people are more conscious of what they're doing, but it doesn't matter. The results are the results. And I would hope that they would have used the Boston Symphony in that case, which is really interesting because I don't know anything about it other than John Williams. I would hope that they would have used that. Did they? Do you know?
Well, I was just going to say, and this isn't related to that, but anecdotally, as somebody that played lots of instruments in school, brass was like almost all males, like tuba, trombone, trumpet. It was always girls playing wind instruments and string instruments largely. So that's interesting.
There's going to be, whether it's a saxophone or the bigger instruments, and if you there's going to be a physical strength aspect to that. So there's a little bit of filtering with that, right?
I don't know.
No, the best tuba player I have ever met was a female. Like she
Really?
was hands down. Yes. Yeah. I remember because I was part of the Kansas City Youth Symphony, and our tuba player she was impressive. And she was very thin. Like you would not have thought
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
So
I think
I
as
mean,
long
yeah.
as you're a certain age where you can pick it up and reach things like on a tuba, it's not like a sousaphone. Although I'm sure that it pretty much, I think once you're old enough to be able to do something like that, anybody could probably do it.
I can't help but
regardless of gender.
if I look at think of a saxophone, us being from Jersey, we're only going to think of Clarence Clemens, right? And he weighed 300 pounds. So,
No, Kenny G.
like, okay, there you go. I don't want to see what I know. I don't know. Hey, have we digressed a little bit there, Stephen? Just a little?
Completely. Yes, no.
That's what we do here on the Don Sullivan Show. Anything that's related. So, did you play a musical instrument, Shinie? Or did you find yourself moved into the more feminine, we'll say, types of instruments?
I mean, now that you say it, I guess I did. So I actually played the harp. I don't know if you knew that about me.
No,
That's
a
a cool
why I'm
instrument.
asking.
I'm really impressed, especially
Yeah.
because they're big.
It's angelic.
That's awesome.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to play the piano, and the reason why my piano teacher moved me to the harp was because I have short fingers. So physically, I could not advance in the piano. But on the harp, my fingers, and even in the exception where I couldn't reach, I could just roll the chords. And when you roll the chords, everything sounds great on the harp. So yeah, so that was what I did in high school. Was I played the harp in the Kansas City Youth Symphony.
That's awesome.
Well, and I would have never. I mean, I guess the harp sits on the ground. In my previous silly reasoning wouldn't apply. I mean, you don't have to carry a harp. I don't think. Do you? They don't really have them in marching bands and so on. But
I think that you could wheel it. There's like a little stand you can wheel it around sometimes. Is that or you could pick it up depending on how big it is. They come in different sizes.
I wouldn't think anybody could. I mean, they could be huge, right?
Shinie. So do harps come in different sizes?
They do. The concert harp was the one I played. That one's like 85 pounds. So I did have a little cart to wheel it. And you had to shuttle around in a van. And I remember my parents looking for a van, and all they wanted to know was what was the size in the back when all the seats were folded down. Like the poor sales guy was like trying to sell.
I had the tape measure.
Yeah, that's all that mattered.
So let me bring us back a little bit on track here, and I want to look at some specific examples. And this is really particularly interesting, Shinie, since we both were so involved. Obviously, I had a undefined broad title, but my official job title was in product marketing. We do see probably an equivalent amount, even if not a little bit more amount of women in product marketing than certainly in technical marketing by an order of magnitude. But in general, why do you think that is?
So I think it's funny that you say that, because there were several years at VMware when I was very actively recruiting. I don't know if you remember that, but during that time, I did kind of like an informal survey, just of all the product marketing departments. And I literally went through the org chart and I counted everyone. And so entering grads in product marketing was about 50-50. So you are spot on in, but then, once you move to senior manager, the shift went from 60-40. So I was like, oh, this is great. We are promoting more women. And then you look at director and above to 25%. So this goes back to kind of, what we were talking about earlier. Men are viewed as more strategic. They're viewed as leaders. And it goes back to the likability scale once you get into a leadership role. So, go back and look at all the different product marketing leaders. Were they men or were they women?
Well, let me sort of challenge you though a little bit there. I would say that without naming names, because we really shouldn't, but pretty much every woman or every CMO that I knew at VMware was a woman.
Yes. but that's different than product marketing.
Not that different. I
mean, we did the poll in product marketing, right? So product marketing was kind of was the bridge. They were supposed to be technical enough and be able to translate that into a way that would be easy for people to kind of understand a complex concept. So slightly different, in marketing at VMware, at least it was more around like lead gen. And so it was a little bit more program managers versus kind of content creation in the way that, you and I created content back at VMware.
And messaging.
So, and messaging.
Yeah. I viewed more than anything, what my job was to do was to run projects and gather data and create extremely positive and persuasive messaging and deliver it. And I honestly, and without hesitation, would say that I could see no distinction. I mean, there might be different mannerisms. Well, I should say there are different mannerisms. It's sort of silly to say that women and men aren't different, but the mannerisms themselves, whatever they work, absolutely would complement the power of the messaging and the communication if that person was capable enough themselves and the messaging and the communication were right. And I certainly will pat us on the back and the entire time that we all were there, but I just didn't see that in other companies either, that there was any reason for a difference whatsoever, which still is one of the reasons why it mystifies me that there is this, I don't like to use the term, but this sort of institutional innate bias that still exists in that way, which is just clear that it is. Even if you don't understand the reason why, it's clear. Now, we in the Don Sullivan Show here have been very, very fortunate in having very capable women, including yourself, Shinie, of being on and talking to us about every subject that we have covered.
So you think didn't somebody yell at us about that? I think somebody commented like, "We want more women on."
Did get a comment in the first
somebody
week.
Did yell at us about that
in the first weeks, but that went away.
But I mean, we had only done so many interviews.
Yeah, it was like 4 or 5, and somebody wrote to me and didn't like the fact that there hadn't been any women on yet. That changed in the next few weeks, but still.
I'm wondering if, to a degree, your perception of things, is from your own unique experience, and Shinie's
I think probably it always is.
I'm sure you perceptions around this are different from men versus women.
And that's another subject for the Don Sullivan Show, the Scott Peck idea of, road less traveled idea of bracketing yourself so that you can see what the world looks like outside of yourself. It's a tremendous skill not enough people work on. And we should talk about that. But Shinie, let me get back and put you on the spot a little bit without naming names. Do you think, and you can even maybe give me a percentage of this, there are clearly some people out there, men who just are incapable of dealing properly, I'll say, with women who they're managing. And the other side of it is true as well. And I think probably less so, but there are women who are incapable of dealing with men. Do you think that and I'm not even going to sort of state a reason for that. It's just observable, and I've certainly seen it myself in little anecdotes, which I won't mention. But do you think that is getting better or worse, or it's just staying the same?
I think it's still the same. I don't think it's getting necessarily better. I don't think it's necessarily getting worse. I think this is something that we have to kind of be conscious of. I think there's certain men who don't like women, and there's nothing that, we can really do about that. But for me, I really try to focus my time around helping people understand, kind of, ignoring, you don't like the word unconscious bias, but just ignoring the irrelevant signals and really pushing back on that. An example is, I think leaders, HR, when you hear someone that's like, oh, she's just not strategic enough. I just can't see her in a role. Like when you hear things like that, like push back. In fact, that happened to a friend of mine that was interviewing for a department chair. After, she thought she interviewed really well, she didn't get the position. And when she went back and for some constructive feedback, the only feedback she got was, you did really well. You met all the requirements, but you just really couldn't see you in the role. And that was because going back to, it's pattern bias is they couldn't see in the role is because there's never been a woman in the department.
Pattern bias. That's a really good term that I haven't heard before. Patent.
Yeah.
Get that. Get a copyright on that, Shinie. Write a book.
All right. I'll work on that. But yeah, so going back to that is I don't necessarily see it getting better. I think this is something that we can all, myself included, kind of continue to work on and continue to push and continue to challenge others on this.
So I'm going to sort of bring this to a bit of a close, but there are a couple of points I want to make, and I don't mean to be blowing smoke, so to speak, here, but reason you were, I think, the perfect person to have this conversation with, to start with, and I welcome others to come on with different points of views, or do you just want to take it in a different angle? You're a very happy human being, and I've known you for a long time, and I literally have never heard you complain about anything, and that includes when you're being critical of something, and that is an incredibly difficult fine line to tightrope, different metaphor, to walk. I mean, you can be critical, but not complain about something. And so given that point, I'll put you on the spot. You don't have to answer this if you don't want. Do you think there have been times in your career now that you have actually been the victim of some pattern bias?
I would say yes, but I've kind of, when a door closes, you just look for another window, right?
See how happy she is. She absolutely pulls to a whole different positive direction. Way to go, Shinie. Great answer. Go ahead, complete your answer. Yeah, that's just a great way to look at it.
And so, I think it's helped me, be, where I am, which I'm very happy. Like I've loved every single job I've had. I've learned so much, some maybe not as much as others, but every single one of them I've learned and I've grown from it. And I think that's what, makes it's all about the journey.
Make somebody successful and make somebody happy. And you are an incredibly good example of that. And again, why I thought that this rather tricky and sometimes sensitive subject was perfect to open up and talk with you about it. So I'll let you have the last word here. I have an example I want to bring up, but am I missing anything? Anything else we should have actually talked about here? And where do you think it's going? How is this going to get better?
I think it's just, we all have to question each other. We have to be aware. Are we falling into kind of a pattern bias? Like, just so you guys know, like, and I say a lot of women probably feel this way is, every time I'm hired into a leadership position, I always ask myself, did they hire me because I'm a woman, or did they hire me because I'm the most qualified? And I had a really awesome mentor tell me this once, that he was like, absolutely not. You're the most qualified. But even if that did cross someone's mind, take it anyways. Women have been sidelined long enough. And just, it's not about how you got the opportunity, it's what you make with it. So I've always tried to kind of keep that in mind, whenever when I'm second guessing myself. So that's one piece of advice that I'd like to give other women is they wouldn't have given it to you if they didn't think you were qualified.
So I have an example that I love to use that's completely laterally disconnected, and nobody rational would actually think that it has anything to do with this subject. But I'm going to mention what happened when Bill Belichick drafted Julian Edelman. And it was an incredibly profound. Yeah. Well,
I love it.
Yeah, this is great. I can always pull this back to sports. And this is not baseball. This is Belichick. Right. So when he drafted Julian Edelman, It was out of D2, and Edelman was a quarterback. And it was, I think, in the 4th round or so. And Edelman was a little bit surprised. They had Tom Brady, and didn't know what he was going to do. And so he asked Belichick that night. It was just the 2nd or 3rd night of the draft. They said, "Boy, what's going on here?" And Edelman was always, and it still is, a comedian. Belichick just simply said to him, "Goes, we don't have any idea what you're going to do. You're a player. You really are a good player, and we'll figure it out once you get to camp what you're going to do." And that to me was incredibly insightful on, as it always usually it was with Belichick constantly. And Belichick and Edelman turned out to be certainly won 3 rings, and isn't a Hall of Famer probably, but damn close. And Belichick understood that you look for people's qualities, no matter where they seem to fit, or no matter where they would traditionally fit, however that pattern bias exists in terms of the National Football League in this case. But he was able to see beyond that. And this guy became one of the most important players in the National Football League over the last decade. So see how I wrap that together, Steve?
See it. I mean, football is male dominated, so there's that aspect of it too. But I think this.
Well, by the way, if Michelle Tafoya is out there and you'd like to get on to comment on what Steve just said, please, come on. But go ahead.
I think the spirit of it. I understand what you're pointing out. Certainly. Yeah. Are there any female football coaches, OCs, DCs?
Yes, there are. Well, not probably on that level, but there is one. I forget what team.
There is one
on the field coach, and there is at least 2 referees right now. And of course, there's a lot of reasons why. But when it comes to the intellectual side of it, the coaching aspect of it, despite the maybe lack of physical experience and so on, so much of this is purely
coaches are often a lot of coaches were formerly players, and I understand it. Females aren't necessarily encouraged to play American football, so there's probably more at work there. One thing I'd be curious for your view on Shinie, and if you're not sure, that's totally legit, because I'm not either. But I'm wondering if younger generations, if they have less gender biases, will we see an improvement over time? I mean, I'm not that old. I grew up in the 80s / early 90s. But even back then, it was like, if you got,
he likes to let me know at least once an episode that I'm 25 years older than him. But other than that, go ahead. Go ahead. Keep going.
In my contract. Yeah. But I was going to say, even then, like, if you were a boy and somebody said you threw like a girl, that was a diss. And of course, there's a ton of bias, and chauvinism there. So even growing up, that's something I can easily point to. That's an observable, noticeable thing. So I'm wondering if it's any better with the younger generations, and maybe that'll help over time.
So I hope over time that, it gets better. I look at, my generation versus my parents' generation. I feel like there's significant improvements. I'm really hoping that we are moving in the right direction. But again, going back to the words that we use and the language, right? Going back to like, you throw like a girl. My son was in a game board making camp last summer, and he and his friends, they were creating this really cool game. I don't remember what it was called, but then there was a Karen card. And
oh boy,
I pulled him aside and I was like, "Hey, do you know what this means?" Like, "Oh yeah, someone who complains all the time." I was like, "Do you want to call this a Ken card?" And then, that kind of dawned on him. He talked to his buddies. They all discussed it, and then they decided to rename that particular card. I don't remember what they renamed it to, but that was something that he picked up, and he was like, "Yeah, this would be awesome, right? As part of this game." It's just, again, the language, like why? So a woman can't do it, but a man can, and so those are the type of things I think. Again, going back to like the pattern bias, language matters. And one of the things I just want to throw out there in one of my last words is, every time someone says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being a Debbie Downer, or I'm being a negative Nancy," I always say, just don't be a Bobby Bummer. And then it really makes them pause. And I really
that's
think
good.
like as the more we can do this, the more we can push back and challenge each other, the more will be for the next generation. And I tell my daughter, the reason why I do what I do is to raise the glass ceiling just a little bit more to make it easier on the next generation.
I like
Well,
that. I've heard
you
people say,
truly do that.
use the term drama king as well. And it did make me pause. I was like, king? And I was like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. We're flipping it, you know?
Well, and Steve, one of the things about Shinie, and again, trying not to blow too much smoke here, and why she was so perfect for this particular episode, is that Shinie, you could do that with a smile on your face, making the point, and in no way acting like you're admonishing somebody or putting them down. Just do it that's why you're so good at product marketing, obviously, just being
I
able to
think that's a
communicate.
skill. Honestly,
Yeah,
Don, I do think that is a skill that a
yeah,
lot of women in the corporate world have to learn how to give constructive criticism in a really nice way or push back on things in a really nice way. Because if you don't, hearkening back to what Shiny was saying about likability, um,
yeah.
and she can comment on that further. Maybe I'm totally off base here. Apologies if I am, but it seems like that is something. It's probably a personality thing, but I think that is also like a trait you would have to use to be
Yeah,
more
whereas
successful
with
there.
somebody like me, if I got nasty or so, which happened occasionally, people would just look at me and say, "He still thinks it's 1975 in Northern Jersey." You know?
Well, they wouldn't. You wouldn't. They wouldn't say, "Oh, you're too emotional," or "Oh,
Yeah.
you're being bitchy," or something like
No,
that.
they just say I'm a tough guy. That's it. And that's
Yeah. So
sort of what I
that's
was going for decades. So.
yeah. Those are certainly
Hey,
again
Shiny,
that double standard.
you get the last word. Anything else?
No, thank you
I
for having me on here. It's I have to say, Don knows this. Like a lot of women, I struggle with imposter syndrome. So he's been trying to get me on the show for kind of a while, right? And I kept saying no. You gave me the topic, and I said no. And I tried to get out of it earlier this week? Did I not?
Mm. I am somewhat persuasive with this, and you were good.
No, this was awesome. I thought it was, it's great to get other people's viewpoints on things. Somebody that's been successful in this area. Absolutely.
Shawnee, I hope you come back on with us. And I will push hard again. I hope you become a friend of the Don Sullivan Show because this audience is about to explode. I refer to it as vast, and it's not quite so vast yet, but it's going to be vast soon. And I hope you come back on regularly. We can talk about this subject or many others that you know. We may even have an episode in our music series on the harp.
Yeah, we should do
Nice.
a kind of a
Yeah.
musical instruments. We should do like a band camp show. Let's talk about band stuff
Yeah.
because I played in a bunch of different bands, pit orchestra, jazz band, yada yada yada. That'd be a fun episode, Don.
And anything you want to talk about, just reach out to me, Shiny. We'll get you on. We have total creative control from our sponsors here, and we'd love to have you on again. I'm going to have an AI panel pretty soon. That might be something you're interested in too. That'll be a little more difficult to execute, Steve, but we're going to do that, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. So please, when you're ready to come back on, forget that imposter syndrome and get back on with us, Shiny.
All right. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Okay. Steve, you got anything else?
Nope. I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Shiny.
And folks, I have to remind you that even if I did mostly talk about Bill Belichick this episode, even he would agree with Bill Belichick in terms of sports analogies, that is, when I added them into our overall discussion. But even he would agree that no matter where you are, if you're in Silicon Valley or you're getting ready to go under anesthesia, if I'm climbing mountains in Africa, which I will be in a couple of weeks, or anything else, please remember that all at-bats are situational. See you next time.